Wright 20 and Rago auction houses have combined forces in a consolidation move to strengthen their marketplace. Menzie's auction house in Australia is facing increased scrutiny over business practices in regards to art, ownership, and their owner of both of Menzie's auction house. And Sotheby's auction house is going private after 31 years on the public, being traded as a public company. All this and more on today on Behind the Gavel with Jason. Thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and share this on my page real quick. And so it's been, wow, somebody's liking the heck out of this thing. Thank you so much. What's going on here? All right, share. All right. So, sorry about that. So let's start with talking about Wright 20 and Rago joining forces. Announced just about a week ago on the 11th, Wright 20, and which is an auction house in Chicago specializing in 20th century design, modern antiques and accessories and related, decided, and Rago auction houses, which is known as another 20th century powerhouse in New Jersey, decided to join forces as a single entity to try and attract more market share in an increasingly competitive space in 20th century design. A couple of things. Rago started in 1984. Wright 20 started in 2000, so it's obviously the much newer, younger of the companies. Richard Wright will become the CEO of the overarching company that they have formed. Both brands will continue to work individually, though, so that neither of the names will disappear. Wright 20 will stick around. Rago will stick around. David will be on staff. Susan Peralt will be there, of course. And Richard Wright, again, the founder of Wright 20, is the CEO of the combined companies. They, in the press release, they talked about using their combined strengths to make the markets better for themselves and to better serve clients across a broader spectrum of areas. They have technology expertises and marketing abilities really easily. Thanks for watching, Stacy and Sean. If you have any questions, let me know. Combined, they have $65 million in annual revenues and 75 employees combined. Yeah, Damien, that's often how it works, isn't it? The rich do get richer. This mimics something that Leslie Hindman and Wes Cowan did just recently by them combining forces. And so we're seeing a consolidation in mid-size auction houses around the country. I think this trend will continue. I think there's opportunities at all levels for competitive markets to join forces to give a more broad reach. And there's a lot of things you could do with that. I could see benefits of me with some of our companies around the country and for other people as well. There's a lot of good, smaller regional auction houses that should take note of and analyze, is there a possibility to do something similarly in our industry at our sizes? I don't know how the logistics of that would work, but I see it as an interesting thing to keep in mind going forward. And I fully expect to see more of this as, over the next years as the markets are getting larger, but also more segmented. And it kind of, the writing's on the wall. Our societies are much more transient. It's easier, if we have colleagues we can work with closely in Chicago or Dallas or LA, it makes sense to work with somebody you have a really good, strong relationship with if possible. So I can see this becoming more normal. I can see the markets doing more of this as we go forward. Here's an auction house that a lot of us have probably not heard of, Menzie's Art Brand in Australia. Menzie's Art Brand auction house in Australia is a regional auction house there that specializes in art, obviously. They have come under scrutiny over the last several years because their owner, Rodney Menzie, owns Menzie Auction Service, obviously, an art brand, but he also owns Australian Collectibles Trading. And that's a company he formed to buy and sell artwork. And they're coming under scrutiny and are being forced to become more transparent, which is a good thing because of some of the practices they've put in place. They sell a lot of good top tier artists, art and things like that, genre art. But in the article I read specifically talked about a Lipschitz sculpture that they sold. It's coming up for market again, auction again here in the next month or so. They first sold it in 2011, and between then and now, it's come on the market through their auction house 5 different times. And each time, I would assume if we looked at their numbers, it will show a slight increase in value. And they also have an Arkley painting that they offered in 2007, 2009, 2011, 2012, and again in this upcoming auction. And so what it looks like, and there's not a lot of information outlined about him yet. Of course, he's in Sydney, Australia, so it's, you don't have to dig a little deeper. But what it appears to be is that he's bought these paintings, he's running them through auctions, showing them as sold, probably at values increasing slightly each time, and looking for that person at some point to come in and bid hyper competitively against himself, which is, of course, can always be an issue with an auction house and an auction company. And you have to be really careful as a buyer to make sure that you're dealing with a company that doesn't do that. Yeah, it absolutely is show bidding at Damien, and they're doing it brazenly, because these kinds of pieces of art are not going to disappear from your conscience, right? If you are a collector in Australia, looking at these things, you're like, didn't we just see that 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and then 2 years again and 2 years again? I know when we have had the opportunity to resell objects, because we've been in business for, gosh, almost 15 years as the auction company, and I've been in the antiques industry for 25 years here in Kansas City, almost 30 actually, that we do see things repeatedly, but it's because a client, we've had many clients who were buying 20 years ago have died in that interim. People have moved, things changed. So we have sold the same objects repeatedly, but it's absolutely from the person who bought it from us, or however it got to the marketplace. We don't have ownership in those pieces. We have definitely bought estates. I'm still picking. I still love picking, but I'll pick it up at a thrift store or garage sale, throw it in the auction, and it's gone. That's perfectly above board. But what he is doing is a completely different kind of a thing. At first I read the article, I was like, well, there's nothing wrong with owning something you sell. That's pretty standard in the auction industry, that we provide a service, and sometimes people just want to have the cash today. But what he's doing is trying to establish long-term sales records, showing increased value of pieces that he has ownership in. I also wouldn't be surprised if he has other works by those artists that he's trying to just create more demand for. So that is truly a disturbing trend to see, and so publicly in its appearance. It's no regard for what people may think or see. I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of Menzies in press here in the next couple of years as this continues to be seen and reported on. What we found is when something starts to be reported on it, other people express interest in it. Right, exactly. Sotheby's, one of the things I talked about in the article is transparency, and Sotheby's they will take ownership stakes. They will guarantee paintings. They will, all those things that we're talking about, but they do it publicly. They make announcements that this has a guaranteed bid in place, or the auction house has an ownership stake in it. Sotheby's is a publicly held company right now, so they kind of have to, because they have so many stockholders in place. But Christie's does the same thing. We don't do guarantees here, so we don't publish that necessarily. And when I've had things that I've sold, I've not felt the need to do that, because we're not, like I said, we're not doing it. I'm doing it as a consignor, not as the owner of the auction company. So maybe we should, thinking about it, talking about it a lot. I think we might just start putting in the description something along the lines of Casey Auction Company has an ownership share, or Jason has an ownership stake in this object. That wouldn't be outside the realm of something we can and probably will do going forward. Just looking at what's happening here, I think transparency is so key. Being online is very transparent, but there are so many things that can be done that aren't transparent. So something to keep in mind. You might be seeing some changes in how we present things going forward because of that. Which brings us to the big elephant in the room, which is Sotheby's going private. 31 years ago, they had an IPO. They went public. A lot of excitement in the industry about that, obviously. So they've had quarterly reports, annual reports. Anybody can look at those and see where they've stood on a quarterly, annual, decade basis over 31 years and see how they're performing in the marketplace, their sales techniques, their sales All those kinds of things are very public. You can read a lot about Sotheby's online because of that. One of the things that has done, they say, is it's restricted their ability to be competitive with other auction houses. And of course, Christie's is the other auction house that they're competing with on a day-to-day basis. And so Christie's, not being public, doesn't have to publish those quarterly findings. I'm sure they have them internally, but we don't know necessarily that they made $8 million or lost $8 million last quarter. We just know that they sold X, Y, and Z based upon, reports of the marketplace, website activity, and things like that. We don't have access to private sales. We don't have access to private deals that they've worked. Whereas in Sotheby's, all of that information has to be very public. And so, let me get this guy's name right. Patrick Drahi, media tycoon, has been in the media space for a long time. He's made a lot of money in there. Altice is his big brand. He came forward. He's also a collector, client and customer of Sotheby's, and came forward to them at some point in the last probably, this is something that happens overnight at this range, and offered them $3.7 billion, which is a $57 per share offer. It was a 61% increase over value on last Friday, 57% over the last 90-day composite. And the board enthusiastically agreed to that offer. And so that's happening. It's a 275-year-old company, Sotheby's is, and they went public and private a couple of different times. And there's pros and cons to both. And I think that it's an interesting thing to watch for sure, that they're going private again. It'll be interesting to see if they start getting more blockbuster names, blockbuster consignments, or if it's going to continue to be Christie's world and they're just a big squirrel trying to get a bigger nut. They're still doing spectacularly well. They do hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue, offices all over the world, but they're looking to make it more profitable, which is an interesting thing. A couple of things I read on a Bloomberg report about it is that Patrick Drahi is actually extremely debt-ridden. His entire career has been built on buying companies with huge debt loads, and so they said this could be the poster child for the next crash, which is, when you read it like that, it's a concerning statement, because if Sotheby's goes bankrupt, what does that mean for the art industry and the art markets and overall? And so again, we've talked about the economy, how it looks, how that affects day-to-day transactions in the art, antiques, and estate liquidation worlds. And so when you have a company that's being bought out with a huge debt structure in place, PNB Barabas is the sole financer of this project, which is unusual as well. It'll be interesting to see what happens and how their corporate structure changes going forward. I'm sure there'll be people leaving and coming in. I wouldn't be surprised if there's change in branding, change in stances, change in all those kinds of things. I don't know if that sounds shady, Damien. It just sounds like there's a lot of risk. Every company has to take on, do self-analysis of what's the risk basis for them. Our company, big announcement we're going to do right here. Hi from Moscow. Are you kidding me, Cynthia? You're in Moscow? I'm being watched in Moscow right now. That's kind of flipping cool. Wow, that is awesome. Anyway, I hope that's Moscow, Russia, not like Moscow, Indiana, or something like that. But so Damien, I think it's not shady as much as it is just a huge risk. Any debt position is a huge risk position. And, we're getting ready. We've been in our location now for 6 years. We just signed contracts on buying another building to get to a bigger space so that we can serve more clients and more customers. But we're going to take on debt to do that. We're buying a building. We're going to do renovation work. It's a big number for us, but it makes sense, right? It makes sense. And I'm assuming that Patrick Drahi is looking at the numbers. The bank is looking at the numbers, saying, there's a lot of money out here. It's a lot of exposure, but the reward is very good. Auctions are a cyclical business. And cyclical can be from auction to auction or quarter to quarter or year to year. We're having one of our best years ever this year. Last year was a great year for us. The year before that, not so great. It just so happened that a couple of big deals we were competing for went to other auction firms or other avenues. And so it showed up on our bottom line at the end of the year. Last year and this year, we've gotten most of the deals we were looking at to get. So it really makes a difference. And so our bank is a long-term bank. I am hoping that PNB Barabbas is a long-term banks, has a long-term position to behind this big deal. It's $3.7 billion is a huge sum of money to the majority of the world, but it's to get into a company that's probably doing, and I should have this number, but they've got to be doing hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars a year in sales. 3.7 billion isn't a huge output. Sotheby's also has real estate. They also have other technologies and other assets that have value. So the Sotheby's name has value. The contracts they have in place have value. So there's a lot of the database. Oh my goodness, the customer and client database is worth a ton of money. That'd be you could do a lot of marketing with that list of information. So there's a lot of value to that. I'm sure PNP Barabbas is also looking at ancillary revenue streams, being in those rooms with those kinds of people. They're going to get maybe other investment opportunities, deposit opportunities and things like that. So thanks, Damien. I do too. We really do try and support local family businesses here in Kansas City for us, but anywhere we're at, driving across country, I always try and stop in a local diner or restaurant as opposed to a chain for those very reasons. But yeah, I'm excited to it's going to be interesting to watch Sotheby's, how they change over the next 6 months to 5 years with the